Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and it's a real pleasure. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Adele Hartland. Adele is the Managing Director and Master Coach of Lacuna Coaching Ltd. She's a leader in creating conscious workplace cultures. Now, I think you're going to enjoy this episode because Adele's unique blend of science, soul, and real-world leadership experience is transforming. It's transforming how individuals and how organizations thrive. And that's a topic I know that's important to a lot of our listeners. The topic I think is relevant for individuals and organizations of all shapes and sizes who are looking to create that better work environment. They want to scale their businesses, but they want to do it the correct way. It's such an important topic that many large global companies are also focused on. And given the generational changes within organizations, the different types of workers we have, and of course, the multicultural aspects of a modern global workplace, this will be an interesting discussion. But Adele, you're very welcome to VistaTalks.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's a real pleasure, Adele. Let's get right into it. We've got a lot to cover. Now, Adele, your career path, you were originally part of the team that launched Red Bull in Israel. And that's no mean feat. And that led you through to, but I suppose through crisis to some degree and founding Lacuna Coaching. It's anything but conventional. And I want to start with some shocking statistics that you and I have touched on prior to our recording today. Only 13% of Europeans are actually highly engaged at work. And globally, that number, it's only 21%. And you were informing me that that's down 2% since 2023. Now, the question I've got is, what are the critical levers that we need to actually start pulling to re-engage a modern global workforce?
Well, it's a broad question, but I think we can kind of narrow it down. The thing is, like the drops happen. There's only been a drop twice over the last 12 years, and that's in 2020 and 2024. And obviously, we know that there's varying things that link to that. I mean, there's loads of downscaling and the shift to AI. And so there's all these kind of changes that we're doing. And we are also obsessed with AI, and, why? Because how can we do more, be more efficient, get more? But what we're forgetting is what's behind that, right? The people that have to do more, like what actually drives them. And as human beings, it's about connection. It's about how we feel. We don't live in that world anymore of, don't bring emotion to work. Like, we are emotional beings. There's no getting away from that. I think we are all tapping into that a little bit more. We understand that. But, we can't keep doing more and not supporting the individuals or giving them more tools. Right? We've got AI, fantastic. But, you speak to people and it's like, oh, well, our team's downgraded to 2. But the volume of work, it's not impossible. And AI is great. It's there, it's efficient, it can help us, but we still need the human being. Like, AI is modeled off the way we think and the way we do things. And so we've got to find a way how we can still be present because, you look at the stats of burnout, mental health, and then you have companies saying that, oh, mental health has been over-exaggerated. It's not. We don't know how to. We're not given the tools. We're not given the tools on how to better manage that stuff. So I think there needs to be more of a focus on the human being itself and how we can better equip them to kind of, people are high performers. You get high performers, but they have coaches, they have support, they have development. So it's really giving people the tools so that they can, and I said this to you before, we are the most cutting edge technology. We just never received a manual. So really helping people figure out how to actually access that power that we have. And that's not running, 14, 15 hours a day. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And you were talking there a little bit as well about, the mental health side of things, the burnout side of things, and obviously this wider disengagement. And I know that you highlight that poor culture, it actually costs the global economy 438 billion in lost productivity alone last year, which is huge. And, Gallup, I think, estimates that, 9.6 trillion of productivity, which is a heck of a number to get your head around. We get that boost if the global workforce were fully engaged, that's about 9% of the global GDP. Like, it's a huge opportunity and a challenge, isn't it, Adele?
Yeah. Yeah, it's what we're leaving on the table, right? So the 438 billion is what we've actually lost in lost productivity, presenteeism, absenteeism, things like that. There's loads of figures and calculations that we can do, when we look at, we're saying only 13% in Europe are actively engaged. 15% are actively disengaged. So they are like loving to moan, like loving to dislike their job, but they'll probably never leave, right? And then you've got the middle percentage, what, 69% or whatever, we've got the difference there, are just doing the bare minimum. I like to call them the selfie crew. Taking photos, but when someone looks, they might be doing something. And what they say, basically 1 in 2 people is looking for another job, actively looking for another job. There's no emotional connection in what they're doing. And you're not going to be emotionally connected with an organization that makes decisions and just sees you as a number, that hasn't created that kind of sense of belonging that needs to happen in an organization, like to be part of something. So it's a layered approach, and this has been ongoing. We had the big drop in 2020, and now it's continuing. And like I say, it's 9.6 trillion. That's money that's been left on the table that we can get. And there are companies that are doing it. There are companies that have got 70% people engaged, and they've been doing it through building a culture. And there's a
Interesting.
number of things that we need to do that. So it is done, and there's ways we can do it. It's just whether people want to or not.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating. I mean, this sort of cultural crisis, if I can use that term, seems to be persisting at the moment. And, there are things that companies can do, can't they, to reverse that? And you're saying some companies are actually doing pretty well in this space.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the key things, and especially in the recent report that Gallup released, one of the key things is where the biggest bit of disengagement is occurring is with leaders. So these are the people that are actually responsible for encouraging well-being, for driving engagement. So a leader actually has more impact on someone's mental health than their most intimate partner. And so the way in which this can be done is really important. Is, first of all, leaders are feeling overwhelmed because of all this cuts and this and that and whatever's been going on. So they're feeling overwhelmed. They don't feel like they have support. But that's why empowering them is important. So leadership development, helping leaders to understand that the impact that they have. I mean, leadership is something that needs to be developed, right? Understanding how to communicate better, understanding how we all communicate differently, having a high emotional intelligence. So the training of leaders, because those behaviors then filter through the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
And so generally it needs to start at the top. And I know often people are sitting at the top saying, but they're not doing this, they're not doing that. And it does need to start from the top.
Well, talking about leadership and starting from the top, I know you do work with many businesses, including major organizations and brands. And to shift from, let's say, surface level fixes to more lasting transformation, which is, I suppose, what everybody's ultimately chasing if they're looking to improve here. But in your view, Adele, having done this and do this with very large organizations, which often have complex structures, many layers of leadership, what does it actually truly take to start building that conscious culture?
Well, first of all, I normally work through a framework. So I've got a framework that I work through with what I believe needs to be happening and what we need to focus on. So I do a little bit of a heat map. So one of them is leadership clarity. So there needs to be clarity in leadership. And so this is going through the development communication, things like that they need to have in place. The other pillar is cultural integrity. So doing, as you say, making sure that the behaviors within the business are a tangible expression of the values. Because very often I go to an organization and they've got these beautiful values on the wall. We are integrity, we are honesty. But then I say, okay, well, like, give me an example of that and how that plays out in the business. So it's really about setting the tone of that, and then also being people-centric. Okay, so I'm not saying, businesses are in business to make money, of course. But if you've got a people-centric, people-focused approach first, that stuff naturally happens. Then we start tapping into what I call discretionary effort. So when people do above and beyond, it's normally because there's a connection there. So you think about like your experience in work, where it's someone who maybe really annoys you, who's completely obnoxious. They ask you to do a favor or to work late. Chances are you're going to say no. Okay? Where someone who has done a favor, there's some sort of connection that's happened there, you are likely to do that for them. And so really it's about creating connection, something that people feel connected to, that they feel part of, and then changing the behaviors. So that's normally over a process of time, but it can be done. And it starts, normally I do it within leadership teams. So if I have a team, the leaders need to be part of that kind of group, because that's when that shift starts happening. And it's literally just doing the things that matter.
And I think it brings me on to something I want to maybe look into a little bit deeper, that I think leadership today it's quite complex. It isn't just a role today. There are obviously a lot of misunderstood aspects of leadership, whether you're leading a large group across the world, whether they're multilingual, whether different cultural aspects, whether it's technology or language or business or whatever the field is. How do leaders today evolve to meet some of these challenges? Because it's not easy, Adele.
I mean, one of the biggest things for me is to become self-aware. It comes down to personal responsibility, and all of us, every single one of us is here to live life. But personal responsibility is key, right? Understanding who we are, understanding our blind spots, understanding, all of those things, to be self-aware, right? Because a leader can, when you've got self-awareness, when you've got understanding of who you are, it's easy to admit when you've made a mistake, right? To have that integrity, to see someone as a human being, and we don't live in that world anymore where it's like, do as I say. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you think of our parents came from that time. It's just, we don't live there anymore. It's just not how it works. Especially when you look at all the generations we've got, your Gen Zs and your millennials, they don't respond very well to that. And so it's about finding a balance where we can all speak the same language. We are all human after all. And finding those places where we can connect, understanding ourselves, understanding, when you understand and can understand your level of emotional intelligence and the impact that you have on others, when you can understand how you communicate, what your natural tendencies are, you can then notice the difference in others and you can adapt your communication. So it becomes more about understanding and curiosity versus like judgment and defending, right? Because a lot of the time we judge or defend our identity as opposed to understanding the differences in others. So I do think that would be the key thing, is really, taking full responsibility for who you are and your growth and development as a human being.
Yeah, thank you, Adele. And something you touched on there, which I want to come back to. We briefly touched it earlier as well, which is this generational diversity within organizations today, and also multiculturalism as well. They're now it's more now the norm in workplaces than ever before. So how does an organization embrace, I suppose, what you could call those different lived experiences? But you need to share also this shared purpose and understanding, but you have very different lived experiences. You've got generational diversity, you've got different cultures, multiculturalism, languages, etc. How does an organization embrace that and still foster that sort of shared purpose?
Well, again, this is one of the things is when we start, when we start creating connection within people, because we tend to, as human beings, like stick to our crowd, like so you'll find the older generation. But when we start mingling and we start connecting, and so one of the things when I do in programs is about us kind of sharing experiences that we've had, right? So whether it's a time of adversity or something like that, so that we can understand with someone and we create that emotional connection, that one thing that we can kind of connect with, and also being able to understand it, because a lot of the time someone does something that we don't fully understand because it's not how we were brought up, it's not part of our culture, and our natural instinct is to shame someone or judge someone because that's not PC, where sometimes people don't know any better. So it's about informing it. And so when we create those environments, I know I've worked with a couple of companies who people have spoken to me where they've almost been quite offended when someone's come in to give them cultural sensitivity and telling them how things are done. Where I've done with some of my groups where I've got everywhere to share a little bit about them, something you might not know from our culture, so that we start understanding more and we become more open and accepting as opposed to kind of judgmental. So, the key thing is, we talk about how people don't leave, people don't leave jobs, they leave people. So that, if you find, I was in a company where one person left and there was just a ripple effect of everybody else then leaving, because your buddies just left, right? The person who you had a connection to, the person that you felt that there was a sense of belonging. So creating that intentionally builds that sustainability. There's a number of things that I work on, like when I talk about us having leadership clarity and cultural integrity, that's where we start creating trust and alignment. When we have the leadership clarity and the people-centric, that's when we have empowered leadership. And when we have the cultural integrity and the people-centric growth, that's where we get sustainable high performance. So it's about, and each one of those little areas has something that I normally say, okay, where would you rate this? How is that, are people solution focused? Is there leadership development? And we kind of get a bit of a sense or feel, okay, where are the gaps? Where are these bits, these areas that we perhaps need to look holistically?
Yeah, and I love what you said, because a lot of people are chasing high performance, but the way that you phrased it there, sustainable high performance, that's a whole different thing. So thank you for spelling that out for us. I also want to touch on as well this, I suppose, today's modern lifestyles, today's modern workforce. We're kind of living, aren't we, in this age of distraction? Like there's things to take our attention. There's messages coming in from every sort of location and app and device. Maybe our stress response hasn't quite evolved to keep up with a bit of that noise. Maybe you could expand on that. And also, we've got to support people. I think I'd be interested in your views on that, with cultivating that sort of resilience and that focus, because we are bombarded, we are distracted. And I think anxiety as well raised its head here, because it's a common issue that we're seeing growing in the workplace. How can we help in this area, Adele? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, this is an area I'm extremely passionate about. And, I've mentioned you before, the tick box stuff. So like an EAP is fantastic. It's great. But, I've spoken to so many, I've got friends who've got these big businesses and, no one uses it, right? So we've got this employee assistance program. It's costing however much of the budget. It's tick boxed. We've got it. But no one ever phones up some random psychologist who they've never spoken to before. Very, very infrequently do they use that. However, for me, it's about creating awareness and giving people tools, right? So like you say, we are in such an overstimulated world. Literally, something is looking to get our attention every 5 minutes. Plus, we're all addicted to the dopamine hits. So, there's loads of things that I encourage my clients and things to do to kind of limit that. But yes, our stress response is the same stress response that we used to run away from a Bengal tiger or a wild animal. So we're still having that cortisol and all that adrenaline pulsing through our system. But now it's because I forgot to send an email or I didn't do this. So really helping people to understand how we as human beings function, right? Our minds are, they can be super razor sharp, but if we are not managing them and we are easily distracted by absolutely everything, we are creating burnout within ourselves. So giving people the tools, helping them to understand how we can actually regulate, build that resilience, how we can manage our mind, right? Because we are not our thoughts, which no one was ever taught this in school. We weren't taught that, like, you know, just because you're feeling this way, or you can become aware of your thoughts and you can change your thoughts. So that for me is very important, giving people those skills so that they can self-regulate, that so they can deal with, they can show up. It's not about changing stress. Stress is, it's inevitable, but it's changing about how you actually show up and how you can deal with that. And that makes a big difference.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's highly distracted, the dopamine hits, and everything in between. It's such a critical area. And it brings me on nicely as well, Adele, to something else, which is a lot of companies have their values, right? You also have maybe rules and practices and behaviors. But many companies, I feel, they're trying to develop a culture, they claim to be a family, maybe. But what does that actually mean in practice? And can you guide an organization in aligning maybe what they say or what they propose to be with actually what they do? Because sometimes there's a big disconnect there, isn't there?
I mean, that's one of the biggest things that I see are normally an issue with people is, you know, companies like I mentioned earlier, you know, the values on the wall are, this is what we're all about. But the way in which that is shown up, or the way that's expressed within the business is completely different, right? Where they say, oh, we are people first, but people's experience of that is far from it. So the most important thing is building trust. Trust is that foundation. Without trust, and I'm not talking just about any kind of trust, I'm talking about vulnerability-based trust. So that means I trust that I can say how I feel, I can do something without being ostracized or shamed or whatever the case is, which is normally the case. You know, normally it's like we don't talk about that. So that real vulnerability-based trust, once that's there, then we can start engaging in like productive conflict, right? So no one's going to say anything. No one's going to say how they really feel if there's no trust there. Okay. So they won't engage in positive kind of conflict. Then eventually from that, that's when people start taking accountability because they've had a say. Just be, you know, as long as everybody's had their say, they buy into something. Okay, fair enough. I've had my say. Then they'll start taking accountability and eventually you'll get the results you want. But if there's no trust there, none of the other things happen. And so a lot of companies, they lose that's where they lose. The psychological contract is broken because say one thing, something else is happening, you know, doing employment engagement surveys, but then doing nothing after that. Like if you're asking your people for what is the problem, what are you going to actually do to act on it? So it's all about building that trust and keeping that trust. I mean, let's be honest, we all know trust can be broken in a split second and it takes forever to kind of rebuild. And that's where you'll find most managers or leaders are doing really well, is if they've built that trust within their team. Because from that trust, we feel open, we feel safe to communicate about stuff. We are then involved in the process. And yeah, things generally work a lot better.
I really like that. You're sharing some great advice here and some great insights. So thank you, Adele. Yeah, trust, absolutely critical. And as you say, so easy to break. But building that trust, I think, really helps. So thank you. Now, I'm going to bring us back to AI. I know everybody's hearing about it all the time, but I want to talk about it maybe in this context of what we were talking about a moment ago, you know, how busy and distracted we all are. Because the rise of AI, it seems to have created a frenzy of doing. And, you know, the question I know you pose is, should it actually be prompting us to slow down and to think maybe a little bit more deeply about what it means to be human at work?
Yeah, 100%. This is what, and I said to you before, you know, we are human beings. We are not human doings. And the constant do is what, you know, and a lot of the times I've got private clients who are so used to running on the hamster wheel it's a conditioned behavior. Sometimes we don't even know why we do it. I had a client once who she couldn't stop. Literally, it was up and going and going and going and going. She had to achieve, had to achieve, had to achieve. And I said to her, like, when was it that you first decided that you had to be extremely busy to be successful? Right? Because there's something there. And obviously we worked over a period of time, spent time doing some meditating and reflecting on it. And she remembered a story of her father telling her once when she was young and she had started a business, the more you do, the more successful you will be. This became an unconscious driver, right? And so this is what we all got to be aware of as human beings, right? We are all running on a program. Whether we like it or not, we all have a program. It works for some of us, sometimes it doesn't. And when we stop to listen, which I think people had the first experience of that during COVID, was we were literally everything, all the distractions were taken away. Either we went into fear mode, about whatever we were bombarded with, or we took time to reflect and go outside and think about like what is actually important to me. So taking that time, AI is great. It can save you time because you can be a lot more efficient with AI. But we should be taking more time to remember what's important, slowing down, honoring what it is to be a human being. Our minds are brilliant. But if we are overstimulated, if we're not self-regulating, it becomes useless. We're useless.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying. And I think at the end of the day, what you're covering here, it isn't necessarily a particular industry specific, whether it's tech or retail or healthcare, life sciences. You're really touching on the fact that we're all human here. And I suppose the last question I've got for you is, what's the one fundamental mind shift that you would encourage, Adele? Every leader, I suppose, what would you encourage every leader to make right now to become a better communicator, a better leader, and ultimately, I suppose, a better human?
Well, I would definitely say take time to connect with who you are as a person, right? Who you are, who you believe you are, how you show up in this world is all dependent on your identity, right? Your beliefs, your things, that is how you show up in the world. So being aware of what's actually driving you, okay? Whether that's for your kids, for your team, just to remember that we're human first and foremost. I think that's something that we tend to forget. Like we can be human and we can be professional at the same time. Like being human does not make you unprofessional. So I would say take the time to really just ground yourself and ask yourself the question sometimes, like who do I want to be? What kind of leader do I want to be remembered as? Because sometimes we just go through the motions as opposed to really thinking about, the impact that we have on someone else. Because as a leader, there's you first and foremost leading your life, but you have impact on other people. So it's a responsibility on how you move through life and the impact that you have on those around you.
I really like that. Thinking about what kind of leader do you want to be remembered as and leading your own life, but also the impact that you have on others. That's so powerful, Adele. And I really liked what you said earlier. We're human beings, not human doings. So thank you, Adele. That brings us nicely to the end of today's show with Adele Hartland. Please make sure to tune in again to see and or listen to the next Vista Talks, where once again, we'll be discussing some more interesting topics, just like the one today, with interesting people from all around the world. Thank you for being on the show, Adele. It's been a pleasure to catch up with you again today.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure being here today.